Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is Thursday. It is hot as the blazes outside, which means we are in the Mediavine Summer of Live. Today we are doing Blog Tech 911, and I have two very wonderful people here with me. I have Peter Green of Agathon and Lauren Gray of Once Coupled. So I'm going to have Peter go ahead and introduce themselves first. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hi, thanks, Jenny. My name is Peter Green. As Jenny said, my company is Agathon, and we do high-powered WordPress hosting, consulting, heavy lifting, thing. We're based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we've got servers all over the world. And we've been really instrumental recently in working with MVPs to improve their site speed, improve their Google page speed insight scores, and just all around get better efficiency out of their site, out of their resources, and help them understand a little bit better about what it is that they need for their site. And so I'm happy to be here today talking about that in front of everyone viewing. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lauren, will you go ahead and introduce yourself for me, please?
Yes, absolutely. I am Lauren Gray. I am with Once Coupled, and we do pixel perfect themes, a lot of very custom work, everything geared towards site speed as well. So our themes are all optimized for Google page speed insights, and we do audits for Google page speed insights. And we do not do any hosting.
Okay, good. So good. We're not conflicting here. We all have our own exciting things that we're offering. So before we get into the questions, while we're waiting for people to kind of come in, can you talk about how you're connected with Mediavine? I know Peter mentioned we had you guys. We had you at our conference. Both of you were at our conference and speaking. Why do you think that what you guys do is so synergistic with what Mediavine does? How does it work?
Well, I would say, and actually just answering a bit by playing off of what you said before, that there's no conflict. I think that actually what Lauren does and what we do is very complementary, because we don't do a lot of design work, but what we can do is a lot of that low-level hosting work that really, again, helps media MVPs to get the most out of what their site is running on, whatever platform that might be. We do our own hosting, but we also do work within other hosting platforms. If, for example, someone is very happy with where their site is currently hosted, we can actually work within that framework and provide value without having to say, well, what you really need is just one of our packages. We can kind of work within whatever framework a client's in, and a lot of times that does mean that they are ready to move over to a little more of a white glove managed sort of service like we provide on the hosting side of things. And in fact, I know I'll let Lauren answer from her perspective, but I know that Once Coupled and Agathon have actually traded clients back and forth in terms of the complementary nature of the services that we provide. So I think that's it's a really good fit for Mediavine, especially.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because Peter and I have worked together. I think that was last week. Very recently, we did some work together. After
and you're still talking. Good.
Yes, absolutely. It is a joy to work with Peter and his team. So it's great, and I love working with Mediavine as well. Obviously, we've been working together for a while, and I get to work with so many Mediavine clients, and I love that because they're like businesses just like mine. We have the same kind of mindset in terms of lifestyle and goals and visions and everything, myself and Mediavine clients. But then I share that with Mediavine, and I think with Agathon as well, like this quality that we want to achieve and this connection we want with our clients. And I love that I get to partner with other businesses that feel that way. And that's why I love getting to work with you guys as well. It's just like that shared. I know that you're going to be fostering the same type of relationship with the client that I am. So awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we obviously heart big time, both Agathon and Once Coupled. We all work together all the time. And I think that part of what it is that you guys offer that we also are so committed to offering is that, like Peter said, white glove, very connected, committed to going the extra mile and not just saying, well, this is the problem. We're going to go and figure out what the problem is and help you fix it, which I think is a big dividing line between what you guys do and what a lot of other comparable companies do. So I think we've got a bunch of people in here. We've got questions. Oh, Kim Blackvidge wanted to say big waves hello. I've been hosting with Peter and his team in Agathon for the past year and could not be happier. So that's good. That's awesome. Okay. Okay, and also we'll just throw this out that Peter, we're all going to feel real bad for him. He's in Mexico, and so his internet isn't awesome. Everyone cry. It's so hard. It's hard to be Peter Green. But that's why we might sometimes lose him. So that's just a little fair warning on that. If we do, we'll just pop him right back in from the lobby. So no problem there. So we've got a lot of questions from people, and we're encouraging you guys that are in here watching to ask questions as they come to you. If something we say spurs a question, jump on in. You've got these two experts at your disposal. And today we're talking about tech, which can be a difficult thing. For me, it's an impossible thing. So I'm glad that I'm hosting this, and I'm planning on learning a lot while we're here. So I've pretty much divided our questions into ones related to site speed, ones related to images. We've got some hosting questions, some plugin questions, and then some general tech assistance. And I think we'll go ahead and start out with a question from Kay Feather over at Pinch of Nom. And we've got, why is site speed so important? Who does it matter to? And what can the impact be on ad revenue? And I'm going to add just revenue in general. Let's start with Lauren on that one.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Sure, of course. So why is site speed so important? Who does it matter to? And what can be the impact on ad revenue and just revenue in general?
Who does it matter to? Everyone. Anyone with a website, anyone with a site. Site speed matters to Google, I guess, could be a good indicator. Obviously your readers, I think, is ultimately who it matters to. It may run fine for you, but you want your site to run as fast as possible for your readers, especially new readers that aren't like passionate about your site yet. So you want them to get to your content, love it, and then come back to it. So site speed is really for your users. That's why Google likes it. That's why everyone is talking about it. And in terms of ad revenue, I have no firsthand experience in what it is impacting. I have been told by Mediavine that it is very impactful, but I don't have a dashboard with you guys, so I don't think I can really speak to that one.
Is Hochberger in here? Is Professor Eric Hochberger in this room? I'm sure he has thoughts about site speed. We all know how he feels about that. If you're an MVP, you know. So maybe he'll chime in. Sometimes he lurks around and chimes in. We love it. Peter, to you, site speed.
Yeah, so one of the things that we often find is that there's some mild confusion between site speed in terms of clock minutes or clock seconds versus site speed in terms of like Google's PageSpeed Insights measurement. And they serve slightly tangential purposes. So it's important to understand, like, well, what do you mean, what is site speed important and to whom? PageSpeed Insight scores as a measurement are largely important to Google, but that it makes it important to you in terms of ad revenue. But I think what you were asking is about clock speed, right? The time that someone hits enter on their browser and to the time that they actually start seeing things happening, the feel of how responsive a site is in terms of how quickly it comes up. And I would echo Lauren's point that it's incredibly important to users, to readers, which means it should be important to all publishers as well. And in fact, that also is important to Google in that it's one of the measurements that they use to generate their PageSpeed Insight score. So while those two things aren't the same, they are related, and both are in fact important for slightly different reasons. I was talking to Brad at Mediavine in terms of we're trying to nail down a figure that demonstrates how much money am I losing for how much downtime. And so far we've got it to about $20 per 1,000 impressions. Now that's not a measurement of clock speed, but you can overlay that onto your number of impressions by saying if your site's faster, you're getting more impressions, certainly potentially. And so there is a very real dollar relationship between a site that loads very slowly, not only in the sense of how many impressions you can get, but also in the sense of how patient people are going to be while it loads. There's plenty of studies that say, it should be under 2 seconds. If it's over 4 seconds or 5 seconds, you're going to lose about 70% of your readership or whatever. These are real things. These are not theoretical sorts of things. So it's kind of important to everyone. And that's part of the reason why we're talking today and why we want to talk through some of the specifics of what site speed, Google PageSpeed Insights, why those things matter, how they matter, and how to affect those.
Yeah, I always, you guys say real smart things, and I always think about it like the annoyance factor, which is how annoyed am I willing to be before I say nope, and then I close the browser. So that's pretty much the way I view page speed, and it's a real thing. Like, how long are people willing to sit there and wait? Okay, great answers from both of you. Let us look at some of these other site speed related questions. I heard some people mentioning Google PageSpeed Insights. So can we talk a little bit about what the difference is between a speed test measuring how fast a site performs and a Google PageSpeed test measuring the site against Google's metric? And why does everyone talk about Google PageSpeed Insights? Why does that matter?
Sure, I can talk about that. As I mentioned, they sort of go hand in hand, and any good audit will actually address both of those things. I know that you've got to look at both the clock speed and the Google PageSpeed Insights. Google PageSpeed Insights is a score that was effectively invented by Google. It's an artificial score in some sense, in that it's created. It's not a measurement of something objective, but it's actually something that Google has created, and it reflects what Google considers important so it's kind of a public-facing way of understanding how Google ranks pages and why they rank them in a certain way. What that translates to is things like PageRank, things like where you appear in search engine results, not necessarily directly because you're not looking at keywords and that sort of thing. But what you are looking at is the effectiveness of the presentation of the content on your site, and Google has helpfully presented this way of scoring it. So that's the importance of the Google PageSpeed Insights metric. But there again, you can have a lot of content that Google thinks it needs to be more optimized, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a poor reader experience. You could have a very, very fast site that has some images that are unoptimized, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the net effect on your readership may not be that big of a deal, because Google will really stick to their idea of what optimization should look like. And your readers may not even care that much, and it may not really affect the responsiveness of your site. And so you have to take those two things hand in hand, because readers expect something slightly different than what Google is measuring, and Google expects something from what a clock measurement of the responsiveness of your site might be measuring.
So then which metric, oh yeah, please jump in, Lauren.
I think I can follow up on that, in that this metric that Google has, that is their subjective, like, this is what we believe, is not, most of these other tools to a large extent are, and even Google PageSpeed Insights partly now, are measuring like that clock time that Peter mentioned. And Google is really obsessed with this like first time view. So many of their recommendations are all geared towards putting something in front of your clients, your readers, immediately, and having this like progressive addition of other content. And that can be really hard to achieve. And there can be other ways, even if that is not optimized, that you can still present content very quickly. So Google's looking at like, are you doing this and that? And you can do all of these complicated solutions on any host. But if you have a really fast host, then your site might look like it's loading as fast as someone who's done these different types of optimizations as you have. I love the recommendations Google makes, because I feel like they are so focused on the user experience. I totally agree with a lot of the recommendations that they're making, but I definitely think they can be hard, and they are completely like, Google wants you to do this, and Google's gonna like they can't tell you, does it feel like it's loading fast? it's difficult. They're attempting to, but it's difficult for them to measure that. And so they just have these numbers that they have to tell you, are you meeting these numbers or not? And that's what you're looking for when you're going for these green scores with Google PageSpeed Insights, is to meet these numbers. And theoretically, yes, those improve your total load time. Like, they will improve overall. Like, I guess it's wrong to say your total load time. They're working to improve your first view load time. But that's maybe a little too complex to worry about right now. Most of those like best practice recommendations are there to help you get to a faster load time.
And just to follow up on that, the converse of something you said is also true, in that you can game your PageSpeed Insights score to be high, and that is no guarantee whatsoever that you're presenting quality content, that you're presenting an overall good experience. You could have, a terrible layout, a terrible design that's technically correct, but is doing your readers no service whatsoever. And so it is one tool, and it measures something very specific and very important, especially for publishers with ads, but it is by no means a be-all, end-all.
So if you were going to really want to attack your page speed, I wake up this morning and I decide, like, page speed is my jam. I'm going to focus solely on page speed for the rest of the summer. This is my summer of page speed. What tests do I don't know why that's not on more t-shirts, and more movies aren't made about that. Like, it's fascinating. But if I decided that this morning, what tests would I need to go out and do if I wasn't going to necessarily start out by hiring someone to audit my site? If I wanted to try to do a little DIY, what tests do I need to do? I know Google PageSpeed Insights is one, but where else could I go? Either one of you.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. I'll touch just briefly on the Google PageSpeed Insights report from a DIY perspective. The nice thing there is that the impact of the line items that they find are sorted by most impactful to least impactful. So if you're looking to DIY something, run the report, run your homepage and a handful of internal pages and generate those reports. And you can start at the top and start potentially addressing some low-hanging fruit and make some pretty significant strides just by starting and going top down. The other thing that I would recommend is running that clock speed test. So with something like webpagetest.org, that's generally the one that Mediavine and others recommend. There are other tests out there that generate some of the same content and also perhaps some distracting content like GTmetrix, which provides requires a little more understanding of how it works. But at the same time, it does provide a few more bells and whistles that once you do understand how those things tie in and make sure that you're measuring what you want to be measuring, it's actually a pretty nice tool. Webpagetest.org is really great because it will spit out pretty much exactly what you would expect, and there's a lot less interpretation that has to happen. One of the nicest features in any of those speed tests is going into the waterfall, which shows you every single request that is necessary for loading the page that you're testing. And so very visually, very quickly, you can see where load times are slow, where delays are happening, how many requests in total you're requiring to generate a given page. And so you can kind of see where the slow bits are. It'll even break it down to, okay, this request took 1.5 seconds, and within that 1.5 seconds, it actually took, half a second just to connect to your server. Well, then you have that information that you can either go back to your host, or if you really want to DIY, really start to dig in and try and figure out where that slowness happens. So that's webpagetest.org. That's probably hand in hand one of the tools that we use most often with the PageSpeed Insights score.
And I went ahead, we just had my wonderful, wonderful colleague Susanna just posted webpagetest.org, so everyone can link up to that and check it that we're talking about. Lauren, can you give me some answers on that question too?
Yeah, I would have mentioned the same, Google PageSpeed Insights, webpagetest.org. I would even recommend, if you want to DIY, Well, if you're going to spend a whole summer, you might as well learn everything you can.
The most exciting summer of all time.
Right. If you really want to get through all that dry material, just go write your test and like figure out what everything means. But if you don't necessarily want to learn what everything means and you don't want to hire someone, I would like find a couple articles and follow some recommendations. And I would use those tests as a secondary, like, are the changes I'm making impactful? Like, are they doing anything at all? I would do something like that. Like if it says the article you're reading says to work on caching, you go work on caching. Do you run these tests and still get caching warnings? Like that's a quick way to look at it, and you can look for the word cache and you can see if the number of warnings has decreased without having to try and figure out what's listed there and what everything means. I think there's value in doing that, in understanding those recommendations, but that can be totally overwhelming. I know everyone emails me back, even when I've tried to like summarize, and they're like, I'm overwhelmed. I totally get it. But if you follow like an article instead of trying to understand that might get you a little further without being like, I'm done. Stop here.
Well, so yeah, that was one of our questions that we had from people, is also what the heck, like when you get your PageSpeed Insights results, how do you not just like want to throw your laptop and run away screaming? Which that's not what they asked, but I put that in there. And then Jill Selkowitz actually just must be like empathic. And she said, I just ran it and I got all A's except for cache, and it says all this stuff needs to be cached. I have no idea what that means or what to do. She followed up with, how does one cache, Lauren? And she's not talking about like cash. She's talking about like cash.
How do you make it rain, Lauren?
Yeah. Which please tell us all.
Caching is not actually something that I specialize in, so Peter probably would be better at answering this, but I will say that that probably was the worst example I could have given, because ads are going to throw up caching warnings no matter what. So you're going to have the least impact on that particular warning. If you're looking at caching, look for anything with your URL. So if you see something and it's coming from your site, you need to work on caching. If it's coming from all these external sites, they probably literally have the word ad in them. And don't worry about those. If they have, you might have a plugin that is calling external resources that you could remove. So that would be, if you're looking through those URLs, the first thing is like, are they even coming from your site? If not, you probably don't need to totally worry about it. But I'm sure Peter can talk to us a little bit about if they are coming from your site.
Jill just said she was tech stupid. Jill, you're not tech. Peter.
I think we all probably have we all, I mean, there's always the spectrum, right, of technology. So never consider that you're particularly stupid, because you always know something that someone else doesn't. So in terms of caching, there are a number of caches that kind of come into play. Specific to the PageSpeed Insights reports, one is a browser cache, and it indicates how long a browser should be instructed to keep a local copy of certain assets. So for example, if you have a logo for your home page that changes once every 7 years, you can suggest to the browsers of the people coming to your site, hey, keep a local copy of this logo for 3 months. We know it's not going to change, and when it changes, we're going to recognize that, you know, we have to have some lead time to tell those caches to recharge. But in the meantime, every time you come to my site, if you're caching my logo, that's one fewer request that you need to make to my server in order to load my site. And so you think about a logo, you think about all of your furniture on your design, you think about CSS and JavaScript assets. All of these things can be cached at different times for different lengths of time. And all of those things then, if they live in the browser, mean that loading your site is much faster on repeat visits, because a lot of those assets are repeated. The furniture of your header, your flag, is going to be the same on your home page, on your internal pages, on things that are even live outside of WordPress if you have some forum software or something like that. so that's one big part of the cache is a browser cache. That's the thing that shows up oftentimes in the page speed reports. You might have heard of other kinds of caching, so like page caches. Mm-hmm. Those don't directly show up in the page speed reports, but the way they do show up is in things like the timing on that first page, first paint, or the time to first byte, which is the moment that the browser knows that the server is online. And page caching helps this, because what happens is that whenever anyone requests one of the pages on your site, the page cache will keep a local copy all rendered out with all of the content already pulled out of the database and saved to a local file. And if someone else comes to the site and asks for that same page, the server will know that it already has a copy rendered, and it won't even have to go to WordPress. It won't have to go to the database. It won't have to assemble the page. It'll just have that page already ready and send it out very quickly. Oftentimes that generates like a 10 times speed up in presenting that page. It makes your site look very, very fast. And so it shows up in the Page Speed Insights report in that your server looks really fast. There's no line item that says, hey, you need to be using page caching, but you know if you'll need it when you have an item in the report that says, hey, it took your server like a second and a half to respond. You might want to check your server response time. That's when you might be considering using a page cache. And there are a bunch of plugins out there that do very similar sorts of things. There's some free ones like WP Super Cache, which does a good job. It's very, very simple. There's a payware one called WP Rocket, which is very good, very thorough, very complete in its feature set. But we have clients that use a half dozen, 8, 10 different caching plugins, and they all kind of do the same thing.
Excellent. All right, I think we're going to leave the land of page speed for a little bit and move into the land of images. And those are directly related because images have a lot of impact on page speed. So let's talk a little bit about our first question, which is, why should we compress images? What's even the point of that?
They're so much smaller.
Yes, smaller.
They take so much less time to load.
Good. So faster, essentially. We're trying to speed things up. Always.
We're still going to talk about page speed.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, it's exactly what this is.
Yeah, we're always going to get back to page speed. And smaller images load faster. And all of y'all sitting on great broadband are like, hey, what's the big deal? Those of us that live in Latin America, your readers that are on, prepaid cell phone plans that don't have 4G out in, their farm on Alabama or whatever, they will appreciate very, very much if you use compressed images, especially because those mobile users are probably looking at such a lower fidelity version of your image anyway, that on such a small screen that they won't even know the difference except that it's faster. And conversely, they wouldn't know the difference if you put up a really high quality image because they're looking on a 5-inch screen. As mobile grows more and more important, and it is always growing more and more important, image optimization is getting more important, and compression is getting more important. And in fact, I would argue in many cases, image quality, that highest fidelity quality, is actually diminishing in importance.
Which nobody.
You guys have nothing to gain by like super amazing high-res photos, essentially. So I have a couple of comments here, and then we'll follow back up with that. So Hilda Solaris said, ever since I moved to Agathon, I can sleep soundly knowing my site is in the best hands. She just shared that, so just a little love. And then Ivy said, hi, I recently got an email from Google that my site is affected by 548 instances of recipe markup issues. What does this mean, and is it something easy to fix? Either.
What have you been telling? What have you been telling folks, Lauren? Because we haven't had a lot of our clients come to us But what we actually did notice is that some of our clients have posted to some of the Mediavine groups.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose him?
We might have just lost him.
Okay.
So yeah, I totally misspoke. He is not in Mexico. He's in a Latin America country though. And I don't want to tell anyone in case they decide to go visit him unexpectedly, but he can tell you if he wants to. We'll hopefully get him back in a minute. Lauren, will you go ahead and take that?
Yeah, I mean, I have not had anyone email me about that actually. We don't do any SEO, so I got a bunch of notifications about it myself, but we haven't really addressed it. I think they're just sending that out to everyone that's registered with Search Console. And I am really just assuming, because I haven't looked into it, that it's probably related to the new fields. So those video and keywords, if you haven't gone back and optimized, or if you've left something out of your recipe card, they're asking you to go back and fill that information in, which is recommended just to make sure you have the highest chance of having a rich recipe card, et cetera, within their results anyway. So it's for filling out schema.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people are saying they're all getting the email about the recipe markup. We're getting a bunch of comments on that. So that's kind of a thing that is happening to people. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're getting all sorts. People are still asking about the images. Going back to that, Courtney said, is there a good way to compress to lossy without totally killing image quality? And we've got quite a few questions about that. Can you give a little bit of insight on that, on these compression issues?
Yes. I have so many thoughts on it that I don't even know where to start.
Good, I like that.
Yes, I agree with Peter that there's this idea that we need really high quality images, but there's this disconnect between other readers that can't handle those high quality images, and a lot of people that aren't necessarily going to see that. I know a lot of us that work professionally on the internet have high resolution screens. And so it's particularly clear to us when an image does not look great. It's probably not that clear to your reader, and there are some ways, like workarounds for it. Unfortunately, they're just not incredibly easy. Like, I implement fixes directly into custom themes through SourceSet, which is supported by default by WordPress, but some custom setup needs to go into that. And I think that's all a little complex. But
oops, he's gone again.
I know, I noticed that Peter left again, dropped out. But I guess the point I'm just trying to make is that image quality is difficult, and it's probably going to vary from site to site. So there's compression, obviously, which I will speak to in a moment. But I want to touch on image size, because I think that is a big component that it's so hard to see that aspect of it. So we're all told we should go install Imagify or Short Pixel, and we should compress all of our images. However, your theme is probably loading an image that is retina ready, meaning it's twice as big as the area that's displaying it. So if it's being displayed in your sidebar, it might be 300 pixels. But if it's retina ready or a retina image, that means that it is an image that is 600 pixels, and it's being squashed down into 300 so that it looks high resolution on our high resolution screens. That image is 4 times as big in file size as an image that's just 300 pixels wide. And so that is almost always the reason that if you have run your images through an image compression plugin and you're still seeing warnings, especially if you've done the lossy setting, your images are probably too large, and you either need to insert them smaller, switch to a theme that uses smaller images, or work with a theme like it would be a newly emerging theme probably that has better support for SourceSet. I don't know any that have those that are pre-made themes, but they probably exist, and I will look for one.
That's great.
So in terms of image compression, Imagify and ShortPixel are both good options. It is really going to probably depend on like how you export your images and the colors that are in them. I've had clients like test both side by side, and some clients prefer Imagify and some clients prefer Short Pixel. I can't speak to like one being the best. I would just say to go and test your images on both of those plugins and see what works best for you. I've tested my images in Short Pixel, and that's what I prefer. And the team, their support team, has helped me out a lot. But like when we do it side by side for clients, they might choose Imagify. So I don't think that there's going to be one answer, and you can't ask your friend and they say one works best for them and you use that. You've got to try it on your own images and see. The good thing is that both of those can be reversed. So you can click undo. That costs money when you click undo because you need credits to recompress. But if you're just running a small subset, then you can see what they look like and then undo it if you don't like it.
I'm bringing Peter back in, and we're going to try to. So Kay has a question. We'll ask her for a minute. So you said what were the two plugins? And you said basically, hey, Peter, welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
Okay, and you said it was basically just trial and error, Lauren. Just give it a shot.
I would try both on a couple different types of images. So light images, dark images, old ones, new ones, ones that have text, one that don't. Give that a try with all of those types of images and pick one that works best for you. Yeah.
I would add to that in terms of the quality. Each of Imagify and Short Pixel have the ability to use the higher quality. What we've tried to do is single out a page and work with the images on that page and then retest just that page. And the lowest level of compression that Google is happy with is probably where you can safely stop compressing. The only other thing I would mention in terms of the difference between Imagify and Short Pixel, obviously the quality can vary, is the pricing model. The pricing model for Short Pixel is per image. The pricing model for Imagify is based on the amount of space that it's optimizing. And so it might be that if you're a very heavy photography site, you have very, very large images, it might be that the number of images comes out cheaper. Or if you have a lot of small images, it might be that Imagify is a little bit cheaper in that case. So, but those are both pretty high quality options.
Excellent. We've got two choices, and you need to go and just give them a test and see which one you like better. Okay, so Kay also wants to know, should you host images externally, like on Flickr or Amazon AWS, or on the site? And does that impact your, she said SEO, we don't have to talk about that though, or site speed?
I don't love the idea of hosting images offsite, only because I prefer that everything be under the control of where your hosting is. It's just one more moving part. And especially because the image optimization plugins that we've talked about don't operate on remotely hosted files, and so you'd have to add one more step to your workflow and manually optimize those images, or use some sort of a workflow in After Effects or Photoshop or whatever you're using to process photos locally before you upload those into AWS or whatever the case may be. It's possible that you could see a speed increase by remotely hosting those images. They could load a little bit faster if you're on shared hosting or that sort of thing. And obviously, if you're on hosting that severely limits the amount of space you have, that might be a constraint, that you don't have a lot of space to upload a bunch of images. But those are problems that can be solved without pushing your images to an external source. And I think losing that control is more important, at least in my perspective.
Okay.
I would agree.
Lauren concurs.
Yes.
Excellent. Did you have something to add to that, Lauren?
I feel strongly that you should host them through WordPress for the reasons that Peter stated.
All right. Excellent. So whatever gains would be negligible, it's a lot safer and better practices just to have them all hosted, all under one roof. Okay, so let's get some general, well, I'm going to actually go to plugins. Let's go to another another subcategory. So on plugins, I've actually, Lauren, you wrote a really great post for us on plugins and doing a plugin self audit. And I think that I'm going to have both of you kind of say those words out loud again. Like, there's such a big misconception that there's inherently wrong to have so many plugins, or there's a certain number, or I shouldn't have in terms of plugins. So talk a little bit about that. Is too many a bad thing? Is it possible to have too many?
I do not think too many plugins is a bad thing. And I am actively working to change minds on this topic. I get so many people that come and they just want to delete plugins. And I think you should delete plugins if you're not using them. But like there have been articles that say there's this target number, as you mentioned, Jenny, and there is not this target number. You can have one bad plugin and it will destroy your site. You can have 60 good plugins and not impact your site. And you'll see that if you're running a WooCommerce site or something like that, where these very small functionality plugins are being added and they're not even loading on the front end of your site. That is an instance where you'll usually see something like 60, which I do generally is high for what I see, but I don't think the number of plugins directly correlates to your site speed. It's what those plugins do for you if you need them. I think you should have a clean house and like delete plugins that aren't actively used anyway, just so you have an idea of what's going on your site, but not just delete them because you heard that 20 was the number and you got to get down from 22 to 20. You just got to get rid of 2 more plugins.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that there's no magic number. And I think the key to what you said, Lauren, is there's no direct correlation. I think in our experience, there is a weak correlation between the number of plugins and the performance from the hosting side of things. But I think that weak correlation is not because of a number. It's because of an attitude of plugins solve everything. It's not that there's a particular number of plugins, but there's an attitude of just adding and adding and adding and adding, and then also not going through and cleaning up. A lot of the times when we will do an audit, and it's not the number of plugins, but we do find that one bad plugin that's misbehaving or whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't even use that. I'm like, okay, so the only thing I would say about the number of plugins is that the higher your number, the greater the likelihood, just statistically, that one of those is going to be problematic. But it's not the number that's really the problem. It is the individual plugins.
Quality, not quantity. And numbers aren't bad. It's kind of clean out your closet. If you're not wearing it, if you haven't worn it in a long time, you don't need to have it in there anymore. And especially if you don't, the analogy kind of lost track there. So if we're talking about, Hilda has a question about plugins. She said, if I need to delete several plugins that have been inactive, can they be removed at once or one at a time? Which is a better way if I'm going through and I'm cleaning house on my plugins. And we actually Susanna just posted Lauren's great blog post that she guested for us on doing a plugin self-audit. So that's a great place to start. But can anyone address Hilda?
Yeah, in theory, it is totally safe to remove inactive plugins. In practice, people do some amazing, crazy bad things in their plugin code. And we just always recommend that if you want to be safest, just take a quick backup before you do anything else. Before you remove plugins, we recommend taking a quick backup, removing all the plugins at once. There's nothing that really should be problematic with removing a number of them versus removing one at a time. And then if you don't need the backup, just toss it. Much like plugins that you aren't using, if you don't need the backup, go ahead and toss that as well. But yeah, in general, you'd be safe to just remove the whole lot. But you'd be surprised at what can happen that shouldn't be possible to happen, and it does.
So could you guys, I don't know if this is controversial or not because I'm not like a plugin expert, but could you guys talk about some potential bad actors, places where, or plugins that are stereotypically or have historically been problem causers when people install them? Lauren,
I've
do you
got
have
two
any?
that come to mind.
Great.
Yeah. I want to preface this is a great plugin, but Auto Optimize can pull your site down if the settings are not correct. Specifically, if there's a setting under JavaScript and CSS that is like aggregate inline code, something along those lines. If that's enabled, the cache will go really large and it'll do really weird things to your site. Like you will never guess that it is auto optimized that is destroying your site, and that is the problem. If you don't have those, sometimes those are enabled because they have to be enabled for something to work. But I would recommend reaching out to a tech professional at that point and having them fix the root issue, not enabling that setting. You have to remember to clear your cache regularly if you enable that setting, because if you forget, it'll get really weird. So it's not a bad plugin, but it is an example of a plugin that can bring down your site if it's not set up correctly. And I think Top 10 was another. I used to use it a bunch, but for some reason, something about it wasn't getting cached and it brought down a client site, and now I don't use it anymore. I actually can't say I understand what happened. Just that when the host emailed me, they said it was Top 10. And I was like, okay, we're going to stop using Top 10 just to be on the safe side. So maybe not the most informative. Maybe it was a setting issue. I can't even say. But I did run into an issue with that once.
Yeah, I think if any of your publishers were on this call, they would be saying probably Social Warfare Pro. And that's kind of one of those weird examples where, by and large, plugins aren't bad. They just kind of have this bloat to them sometimes, or they give you too much control, like Auto Optimize. You can blow up your site really fast. The fact that Social Warfare Pro has continued over, and I know this because I had to look in the support forums, and this is kind of a recurring problem where upgrades are kind of they just yield terrible results sometimes, and it's one of those results where it will give you the white screen of death, and you got to back out everything, and depending on how savvy your host is, they might be like, well, you got to go to backups, which means then you've got to lose a day's worth of stuff, and it turns out the host isn't really doing backups on your site. We've had that problem with some of our clients, our refugees from other hosts, and so that's a pretty bad example. I don't love Jetpack, only because, kind of like Auto Optimize, you can enable so many things that are so bad for your page speed insight score, and it just feels bloated. I know we talked about number of indicators for bad plugin practices, and if I see that like Jetpack is installed and enabled, it's a yellow flag. It's not quite a red flag, but it's a yellow flag that there might be some things in there that were enabled by default, for example, or whatever, that are causing the site to run a little bit sluggishly. So that's one that I'm always kind of like, if you can do what you need to do without Jetpack, just jettison it, because it's big.
And I think whenever I hear about a client using Jetpack, it's almost always because they like their stats better. If that's the case, like, go disable everything else. If you want Jetpack stats and you really need to have those, that's totally fine. Just like disable everything else because you don't need it. And I think, I'm not sure, but almost all of my clients that want to keep it, that's the reason, is they prefer to be able to glance at those stats. There are some plugins actually that have like a Google Analytics dashboard. I think Monster Insights has it actually, which is that by Yoast now? I don't know. But you can, if you're going to use Jetpack for stats, deactivate everything else. You don't need it.
Yep. Agreed.
So I'm going to have, those are great. And it seems like Jetpack is consistently a conversation. Susanna or another one of my awesome colleagues, if they could share the things that don't play nicely with Mediavine ads, that would be great if we would post that in our comments. So I have a question from someone you guys might have heard of. Her name is Amber Bracegirdle. And when you guys mentioned backups, she has the question. She said she wants you guys to talk about taking backups. She said every time she's tried to manage this herself, she struggles with what plugins to use, or the plugin timing out without taking a backup, or some other random thing. And she feels like she's breaking her site instead of taking a backup to make it safer.
Yeah.
Lauren, you want to hit that real quick?
Yes, I will address this. You should talk to your host. If you're not on a host that does backups and ideally caching, I feel like you should be on a host that does those things, because they know your server best. And like Amber said, like, your server will time out when taking these backups, and usually your host has a non-plugin method that is so much faster and more efficient to take backups. I just think it's silly.
Sorry, Amber's host is her husband. She just shared that in the comments. James?
Awkward.
Okay, well, besides that instance, I like VaultPress. If you're looking for a plugin, I think VaultPress is good. But I think you should talk to Peter, and you should host Peter. Amber.
I fully agree.
Awkward.
The other one that we like is Updraft Plus, but it does almost any plugin that runs in the way that Updraft does, where it's taking those like a point in time snapshot. I think VaultPress does incremental stuff, like it's always backing up and pushing stuff, right? Is that correct, Lauren?
I don't know. They do smaller pieces like Updraft Plus. I don't know the schedule for that.
Okay, so I think VaultPress does a push sort of method where it's continuously updating. Updraft runs like scheduled jobs where it's doing a full backup at a point in time. And you are going to run potentially, however your hosting is set up, you're going to run into potential problems with that Updraft Plus method of doing a scheduled point in time backup. You could have timeouts, you could have all those other things. Those are usually addressable. Those are things that's not a reason that you necessarily have to change hosts. There might be some tweaking that can be done in the PHP configuration. I would say that in general, having multiple layers of backups is a really good thing. I like having as near real-time backups. I like having point-in-time backups that you yourself can kick off, and I like having the assurance that your host is also doing some backups. They all serve very different purposes, and in those occasions where you might be doing, like I said earlier, some site maintenance, it's a lot better to do a backup one time than depending on whatever your host has for backups, whether or not they've practiced their restores in the last 2 weeks, a month, and whether or not 24 hours has passed since they've actually taken a backup of their site, during which time you could lose a bunch of data.
I love
Jump in. No, go for it. We've got about time for two more, but go in, jump in.
I was just going to say that I love that Peter's like, you don't have to switch hosts for this. I don't do hosting, but I totally think you should get like reliable backups, and that you shouldn't worry about it yourself, because I've been there where your site is like hacked or something terrible because you decided that you weren't going to update it for 3 years and you thought it'd be fine. And it was fine until it got hacked. And now your site is like, says bad words on it, and like that's it. There's no other content except for like bad words. This may have happened to me. I feel strongly that if you have a good host that like takes regular backups that you can see, if you want to take your own, I think that is like totally smart. But like a good host, some support package, something that like regularly takes backups for you that is happening, is like so critical to peace of mind, to when something happens that you don't have to try and figure out how to download and restore on your own. I feel very passionately about this.
And we never would have known based on your answer that you have a passionate feeling about it. So yeah, it was very subtle. In terms of segueing now, I wanted to quickly talk about hosting and all the questions that we've ever gotten. And hosting is another thing. And Peter wrote an awesome blog post that one of my great colleagues is going to share about managed hosting. But what are the benefits of a managed host? How important is the host to site speed and site performance and all of those things? Why is it good? And I will actually have Lauren start on this one because she can speak from a third party as opposed to a personal, and then we'll have Peter chime in.
I just checked out. I was like, this is Peter's question.
Good you admit it. That's good.
But I do, and I recommend managed hosts because of the peace of mind I just mentioned. I think that it matters for page speed because you have that extra level of support, like someone that's going to go further than those shared hosts where you're on that budget. I know how important those are. But when you can get on a managed host, I think the peace of mind in terms of backups and that they are optimizing your server for WordPress, that you don't have to do that you don't have to install your own caching plugin. That is something that takes so much mental energy. And it matters. It really does. But it doesn't matter to your content, your job in your site. I don't think it's a good use of your time. And I don't sell these services, but I will highly always recommend to clients that they find someone else to take that on so they can focus on what they're an expert in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how we kind of position it is, if you want to reinvent the wheel for yourself, by all means, the inexpensive hosting, the hands-off hosting is a good way to learn about how everything works, because at some point something's going to break and you're going to have to figure it out. At some point you're going to need to figure out backups. At some point you're going to need to figure out why is my page running slow. Beyond just a peace of mind, I can say that from our perspective, we have done a ton of low-level thinking, of hard solving hard problems, and optimizing and designing an environment that very specifically runs WordPress very, very fast, and not only runs WordPress fast, but works with all of those page caching plugins that I talked about, those 8 or 10. We don't have any problem supporting any of those, or one that I've never heard of that you happen to be using. I can guarantee that we will support it. And those sorts of things translate into, just in terms of raw numbers, it translates into something you can't imagine. I mean, going from your hosting being able to support, 10 10 sessions per second to 1,000 sessions per second, because we can push that information so much faster from an optimized environment. What that translates into as well is that you don't always end up having a host that is selling you the next big package. Your host should be able to provide an efficiency within what they're providing that allows you to scale a lot before you start needing to really jump into some massive new package. And that's, I kind of like our hosting for that, because we can move people up and down by $10 a month increments, rather than $50 or $100 a month increments. We base it on exactly what they need. That's because we care about the community, we care about what people are doing. A lot of hosts, bless their hearts, I mean, it's not a requirement to care about your client's content to be able to do a job well, to do whatever that particular job is. We just think that it helps us empathize with our clients and have a far more direct relationship than an indirect sort of vendor relationship. And I don't know, I think it works really, really well, and it's a lot more fun to do it that way.
Okay, so I hate to have to cut us. We've got one more question, but quickly, you guys, thank you, a big, huge thank you to Peter and Lauren. Tell us where we can find you, Lauren.
theoncecouple.com.
Okay, and Peter?
agathongroup.com.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Okay. And we are dark next week. The Summer of Live is taking a week off for our nation's birthday, but we will be back the following week with Phil Bone, our Senior Vice President of Sales and Revenue. We're going to be talking about what it is that advertisers are looking for when they are buying on your site. We're going to take away all of that mystery, and we're going to talk to Phil because he knows more acronyms possibly than any other human being that I've met on planet Earth. So you do not want to miss that. We're demasking all of the acronyms. Final question. If my site breaks, if I have to call a tech person, quickly, how do I know that this tech person is the tech person that will not rip me off? Lauren, quickly, and then Peter.
Referrals and experience. So proven experience that they've done this before.
Great. Peter?
Promptness in communication and empathy in that communication. Are they selling you a line, or are they actually listening and mirroring what you're describing as your problem and empathizing with it and providing you with information on how they're going to solve it?
Great answers. Guys, you can find them. We can't recommend them. We think they're great. We work with them a lot. And we are so pleased that they were here with us. If you've got more questions, reach out to them. Comment here. We'll answer as much as we can. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful 4th week. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lauren. And we'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Jenny.
Bye, guys.
Bye.